This conference will now be recorded.
Sorry about that.
No problem. Good afternoon and welcome to this session of the APS State Grantee Meeting. We normally enjoy meeting with states face-to-face because that gives us all an opportunity to network with each other and share information. However, we are happy that hosting this virtually has enabled us to open up this year's sessions to as many representatives as states wanted to have, so that's a good thing. Today's session is the second of 4 webinars that will be hosted this week and next, and our subject today is communication. My name is Leslie McGee, and I work with WRMA as a staff member of the APS TARC, and we are hosting this session for you today. Next slide, please. The National Adult Maltreatment Reporting System, or NAMERS, and the Adult Protective Services Technical Assistance Resource Center, the APS TARC, are a project of the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, Department of Health and Human Services, administered by the WRMA Incorporated. Contractors' findings, conclusions, and points of view do not necessarily represent the U.S. Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, Department of Health and Human Services official policy. Before we start, I have a few housekeeping details. This webinar is being recorded. That said, I would like to remind everyone that we are using GoToMeeting for this session in order to provide an interactive forum for participants. Please ensure that your microphones are muted unless you are speaking so that there is no background noise. Also, we are asking that only the panelists use their webcams. You will have the ability to ask questions during the presentation, or you may type your questions into the chat box. Neither I or Andy Capehart, also from the APS TARC, who is assisting with presenting this session, will read the question to the panelists for their response. Next slide, please. Today's discussion will be centered around the grant projects and activities where communications was a particularly critical aspect. We have asked 3 states to serve as panelists today and share their experiences with communications as it relates specifically to their grant activities. Next slide, please. Marlene Coffman is the grant coordinator for the Arkansas Department of Human Services. Marlene will discuss how stakeholder communications impacted Arkansas's grant project activities. Next slide, please. Kate Nance is the grant coordinator for the Utah Department of Human Services. She will provide insight into the work Utah is doing with multilingual outreach, specifically to the Hispanic community, in their work to address financial exploitation. And finally, next slide, please. Michael Roberts, the APS Director of Performance and Policy Development for the Texas Department of Family and Protective Services, will discuss the role that internal organizational communications have played in the success of Texas's grant activities. Next slide, please. At this time, I'd like to ask each of our panelists to take a few moments to tell us a little bit about yourselves and briefly describe your state grant projects. Marlene, would you please go first?
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Marlene Coffman. I'm a social worker with the Arkansas Department of Human Services, Adult Protective Services, as their program coordinator or grant coordinator for this grant. Lifelong Arkansas resident, and I hope that you guys are enjoying weather wherever you are. A little brief overview of our grant. We had several different objectives to reach for. One of them was a new software system to increase the ability of our investigators to be able to document and report. A couple other things that we're working on developing and working on is multidisciplinary teams, and a mentorship program and an education program. Part of that multidisciplinary team build was to build a stakeholder registry. Using the stakeholder registry, we then were reaching out to our stakeholders across the state to get buy-in and participation in the multidisciplinary teams. I guess that's my overview.
Okay, thank you. Next, could you go, Kate, please?
Yes. Hello, everyone. My name is Kate Nance. I am the grant coordinator for the state of Utah, and we are currently in the second year of our grant. So our project is, we have the goal of reducing financial exploitation among Utah's vulnerable adults. So obviously this is a big project and we're trying to hit it from a lot of different angles. But today I really want to speak about the outreach that we're doing to the community, particularly the Spanish-speaking community, and also a little bit about the outreach we are doing to law enforcement and prosecutors as well. So that's me.
Thank you, Kate. Michael, could you please briefly describe your project and introduce yourself as well?
Certainly. My name is Michael Roberts. I'm the Director of Policy and Performance for Adult Protective Services in Texas. We're a state-run APS program, and we have about 750 total staff, and about 500 of them are frontline caseworkers. The grant project that we have is, the goal of that is to improve financial investigation outcomes. And so we are partnering with a couple of the district attorney's offices in a couple of our large metro areas. And there's also a senior justice assessment center in the Houston area that we're partnering with. And we have an existing relationship with the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston. They do medical consultations for us, and so they are subcontracting with a forensic accounting firm to provide the expertise that's needed for this project so that we can improve the exploitation cases that we do. And by working with district attorneys and other law enforcement personnel, we can hopefully improve the prosecution and even perhaps restitution through civil cases for the victims.
Thank you. Sorry, I was on mute. Can we have the next slide, please, Andy? So I'm going to have each of our panelists talk a little bit about the specific communications needs that they faced with these projects. And Kate, I would ask you to go first with this question.
I am happy to do that. So we wanted to reach out to our community in a variety of different ways to really make sure we're reaching everybody. So our plan was to do presentations through senior centers, conferences, things like that. Also have materials delivered directly to our homebound individuals through Meals on Wheels and case managers. And finally, to create materials that our partner agencies could distribute, as well as post on social media or their website, just to really have a lot of outreach. And like I mentioned, our focus was really targeting our Spanish-speaking community here and making sure that we were reaching out to them. So our goal wasn't just to translate the materials that we had into Spanish. So we wanted to have something that really, was appropriate for the community. So we met with some community partners and did our own research and realized that there are some scams that specifically are a problem in Spanish-speaking communities that the rest of us might not encounter. Specifically, notario fraud and immigration fraud is a big problem. So we went ahead and the general materials we created, we updated them to include these scams as well to distribute to those communities. And before we went ahead and had them translated, we sent them out for cultural competence review to our community partners, which was really helpful. And they gave us feedback that I never would have thought of. For instance, always make a note if a hotline or an agency resource that you're including, make a note if they have Spanish-speaking operators available. And also one that I thought was interesting, if there's an option to press 1 for Spanish, write that on the brochure itself. People don't like to listen to a long message in a language they don't know, to see if it tells them to press a certain button for Spanish at the end. And finally, they also encouraged us to put whether the agency would request a social security number. A lot of people are hesitant to call agencies that might request this information. And, you know, given how underreported financial exploitation is, it was really important to us to make sure that we're not doing anything that could discourage reporting. So we made those changes that they told us, and then we went ahead and had it translated into Spanish, and, you know, kind of changed up our images to make it a little more approachable. And we also did this with, we have areas with significant Native American populations, and we did this with them as well. There are some resources that are specific to financial exploitation in Native American communities. So we included those. And then we just, as we were distributing them, we had, you know, to our AAAs and things like that, we had some in Spanish, some tribal, and some just regular that they could hand out. And then briefly, I just want to talk about, we've also created training for our law enforcement and our prosecutors in the state, which has been really great as well, and we've gotten a really good response to that. So that, in a nutshell, is the communications need we have.
Thank you very much. Marlene, you want to go next with this question?
Okay, so we looked at ours. Our stakeholder registry was built to kind of get an idea of who the potential players would be with multidisciplinary teams, to get feedback from the community, and also be a resource directory for our investigators and other partner agencies. So we started looking at how we were going to build the multidisciplinary teams, where they were going to go. Initially, we thought we were going to do 12 regions. Arkansas may not be as large as Texas, but we definitely are very diverse, and not only diverse in our population, but we're diverse in our geography. So there are places that you can't get to from here, because I like to tell people you can't get there from here. So it makes it difficult to get around sometimes. And one of the things that we try to be cognizant of is, if we have a professional who's agreed to be a part of a multidisciplinary team, we don't want them to have to drive 3 hours for a 1-hour meeting. That's not a good use of their time. So we started looking at all that. So we divided it into 12 regions. And then one of the fun things that happened was we needed email addresses so that we could start surveying our participants, or potential participants. And so phone calls were made to almost everyone in that stakeholder registry, and which was really, really a great thing, because those participants, we talked to them, and they gave us good feedback even on that phone call, and they were understood where we were coming from. And matter of fact, they told me that I've been told, when we sent out the survey, I was a little disappointed about the results that we got back, and I was told that when we looked at it, we had a 13% return rate on our survey, and I was told that that is beyond excellent. So I attribute that to the fact that we made those personal phone calls to stakeholders, and we've gotten a really good idea of what we've got going on in the state. Also, because of COVID, it kind of changed up things. So instead of doing 12 regional multidisciplinary teams, we were able to back that up to 4. And because we are doing Zoom type meetings, it makes it easier for everyone to participate. And that is getting some really good feedback from our folks. So those are our needs.
Okay, thank you very much. Michael, would you like to share?
Yes, so we have communication needs that I like to break down into internal and external. So we have, of course, our programmatic staff, our caseworkers, our supervisors, our managers, that need to be aware of what's going on with the project. We have a training department that's outside of APS, and one of the big pieces of the project is the forensic accountants are going to review our training curriculum and recommend changes. So there'll be a lot of communication between those accountants and our curriculum developers, and then there will be back and forth of trying to make sure that everybody's kind of on the same page with what's being recommended, and then the curriculum developers and the trainers work together to make sure that the curriculum is delivered appropriately. Of course, we have communication with our finance and budgeting folks to make sure that we're doing everything correctly from a financial and contracting end. And we keep our attorneys involved just to make sure that everything is legal and that we're following all the steps there. We also have external communication among our partners. Of course, APS, UT Health, Ide Bailey, the forensic accountants, the Houston Senior Justice Assessment Center, the Harris County and Tarrant County district attorneys. Harris County is Houston, Tarrant County is the western side of the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And so another piece of the grant project that we're doing is we're developing checklists for staff to use in their forensic accounting, in their financial investigations that the forensic accountants and law enforcement have had input into. So the police officers and prosecutors are telling us, here's what we need from you when you want us to pursue a financial exploitation case criminally. And so there will be communication as that's being developed, and then communication disseminating that to our staff and ensuring understanding, perhaps working it into our policy, and most likely working it into our training. And then the final piece of our grant is actually having forensic accountants delivering case-specific assessments for financial exploitation allegations. And so we're fortunate in that we have an existing web-based platform that we use for medical assessments. And so once we incorporate forensic accountants into that platform, the communication will be to our staff of just like you access the geriatricians that we have consult on our cases, you'll consult forensic accountants using the same web-based platform, processes, policies, and things like that.
Okay. Does anyone have questions for our panelists before we go to the next question? I did want to ask Marlene one thing about something she said. You talked about changing from 13 teams to 4 and using Zoom meetings. And I was curious if you still had everyone participating who would have been participating had you stayed with the 13 teams.
Well, we're going to do 12. We've had some director changes since this started. So we're now on our 3rd director.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we've had some fun stuff going on. 2nd, 3rd director, okay. And so the thought was she was going to participate in all 12 of those meetings, or he was going to participate in all 12 of those meetings. And again, we were trying to be cognizant of time and travel. That is a big expense, and that is a big, well, it takes away a lot of time. So when we were able to break down move it from 12 to 4 via Zoom, obviously that meant better participation. Our area supervisors, we have 4 area supervisors, and they were not real thrilled with participating in 12 and or even 6, well, actually it would probably be 3 each or something to that effect, different meetings, and because that took a lot of their time, even on Zoom. And so it just kind of made it a little easier to manage That way they only had to devote 1 hour to those meetings a month.
But you still have the level of participation you think you
We
would
do
have gotten.
have, yes,
Good.
the folks that are participating in the community, the stakeholder partners, are actually really excited about it. And when we go to the next question, I'll discuss that. So,
Okay. Well, since we have that segue, can we go to the next slide, please? And Marlene, you can just keep going. Please
going to that.
describe any new or different approaches you used to engage your grant partners that were more effective than previous approaches that were used to engage them.
Well, we're kind of new at this in a way. So this is a giant leap for us, I guess, or baby steps. I'm not sure which one to describe it. Sometimes it feels like it's a giant leap, and sometimes it's baby steps. So there really hasn't been a whole lot of formal communication between our department and stakeholders and partners, other than when we had interactions with them in regards to a case. So having a formal let's talk, what do you bring to the table, what do we bring to the table, how can we work together, kind of communications has been really exciting for people in our state, for partner or stakeholder participants in our state, because they've been excited, and this is an opportunity for us to learn from them and them to learn from us. So they were really, when they started getting those phone calls just to get an email address, they were really excited to hear from us, and excited to hear that we wanted their input. So that was kind of a change, I guess, in the way that we have done our outreach, is we want to hear from you, which was a big deal.
Nice. Michael, would you like to go next on this question, please?
Sure. So we tend to do a lot of projects in our APS program, but one of the things that I'm really excited that we've done is that we've brought together all of our partners, and we held a big kickoff meeting where we explained the project, and we got to see faces. It was by technology, just like this, and so that was really nice to put faces with names, especially for some of these partners who we in our APS state office have not necessarily worked with. They worked with some of our field leadership, but again, not the people in our state office. And part of the funding on our grant is someone at UT Health to coordinate a lot of the project on their end. You know, the grant had to go to an APS organization, but we've had such a strong relationship with the UT Health Science Center in Houston for a couple of decades or more by now, that we've been really comfortable with them taking the lead on a lot of things, and us checking in with them. And so again, communication is important there, by having developed that relationship. And so their research associate pulls together a lot of the meetings and keeps track of certain things. You know, on the financial end, APS has to keep that, because we're you know, we're the grantee, and we're spending both state and federal funds on this. So you know, there's some things that we can't hand over, but we've been very fortunate to have a lead partner in UT Health that is really helping us shoulder a lot of the burden.
Thank you. And Kate, can you respond to this question, please?
Sure, yeah. So regarding our outreach to Spanish-speaking communities, one of the big things we wanted to make sure we were doing is not just reach out to them through our traditional aging partners, like our AAAs and the Alzheimer's Association and AARP. We know that those only reach a limited amount of seniors anyway, but they tend to have less engagement with the Spanish-speaking communities. So we really wanted to go to these people where they were. And we kind of thought a little bit outside the box here. We actually, one of our best places we started with was the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, which isn't necessarily a natural fit with aging, but they know everybody in that community, and they were so helpful to give us connections to people who were really trusted organizations and trusted leaders in the community. For example, one of the most successful presentations we've had, of course, we're all online at this point, was with an organization that does business development within the Hispanic community. So we did like a Facebook Live interview, and for that one event, we reached 200 people, which I don't know how many people you're getting at your online trainings, but that was really huge for us. And we were just, it was important that we found, you know, who those trusted people were within the community. And then, you know, the people followed. The people in the community know them, trust them, and showed up to the event. So that was fabulous. And then as far as how we have worked with our law enforcement and prosecutors. So we formed a committee of police officers, district attorneys to help draft the training. We wanted this to be something that everybody had input in, and, you know, was just very inclusive of everyone's point of view. And how we are doing that a little bit differently is, rather than having, you know, a big one-time training that people can come to, we are going to go out to the agencies themselves. So a couple of years back, our APS did a training with law enforcement and prosecutors. We did one in the southern part of the state and one in the northern part of the state. And I think they got between 50 and 75 people at each of them. So with our first training that we did it with the Salt Lake County District Attorney's Office.
And
And it can be really easy.
Okay.
Yes. Oh, did I go away?
That's okay.
Hey, Kate, we lost you for just a second there. I wasn't sure
Oh,
if it
okay.
was me or if it was everybody, but for just about 20 seconds, we lost you.
Okay, yeah, sorry about that. So I was just saying, with our law enforcement, we want to get out to everybody. We know that financial exploitation cases can be really tricky, especially for a patrol officer who might not know, you know, what a power of attorney is, you know, how a guardianship works. So we just wanted to really give them the tools that they will need, you know, to respond to those, and not simply list it as a civil matter or a family matter and then leave. So one other just little nugget, I know we've all been adjusting to virtual trainings and the quirks they have, like my audio cutting out and all that thing. But one thing I did want to mention is we were doing some community presentations where someone who was hard of hearing was going to attend. And I didn't know this, but not all of these platforms have closed captioning options. I believe Microsoft Teams does and Google Meet does, already built in. And then, of course, if your organization can afford it, you can pay to have closed captions made. But a lot of organizations just don't have those funds. So one thing I did find out through working with our partners in that area was that there are several free services where people can get closed captioning services, like 3 or 4 free hours a month. So if that's ever comes up in your area, it was just great to be able to find a resource to include people who might have otherwise not been included. And that's my answer.
That's extremely helpful. Thank you for sharing that. And we may be asking you to give us that resource list so that we can share it with everyone else, because that would be a lot of help for a lot of people, I think. Thank you. Okay. I think we are ready for our last question, unless anyone has any questions on this topic.
This is Andy, and I'm running the technology today, but I do have a question for Kate after listening to her talk about the outreach to the Latinx community. Did you have did you have to hire someone who spoke Spanish? Did you use an interpreter? How did you go about translating or interpreting both like live presentations and the printed presentations that you have?
Oh, excellent question. And I'm sorry I didn't answer that. So within our agency, we do have several Spanish speakers, but they are people who speak it as a second language. So it was very important to us that we have, you know, someone who is a native Spanish speaker be able to record these presentations. So with the presentation I did live on Facebook, that one was actually done in English. I guess a lot of their population speaks English and they wanted to do it that way. And they were okay with me doing it, so I did. But as far as future ones, we have reached out to our partners in Salt Lake County, and they have an educator, you know, a Spanish-speaking educator who has graciously agreed. I gave her all my materials, and she is recording a presentation that we plan on distributing to other organizations that don't want to do, you know, something in English. And we did kind of want to stay away from an interpreter because you kind of don't have that personal connection. And also we just wanted it to feel like it's somebody from their own community, you know, not like an outsider coming in telling you how it should be done. But I'm sure a lot of, you know, I would love to hear like states like Texas and Arizona, how you guys do it, because I'm sure you just have a much larger percentage. And anyway.
Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else have a question for the three panelists on this topic?
Just as a reminder to everyone, you can either type your questions in the chat box, or you can actually unmute yourself since we're using GoToMeeting and not a GoToWebinar platform. You can actually unmute yourself and ask live questions if you like over audio.
Okay. Well, seeing none, we'll go to topic 3. Next slide, please. And I'm going to ask Michael to go first with this question or this topic. What is the plan for your ongoing involvement and/or communications once the grant period ends?
Sure. Yeah, we definitely want to continue the relationships that we're building in this grant project. The key hurdle is the funding, and so what we are looking at now is ways that we can advocate in our not our session, our legislative session that begins this January, but 2 years from now, how we can build a case to increase our purchase client services funding, which is where we've been paying for our forensic assessments on the medical side from. And you know, we'll continue working with the partners on ongoing updates to curriculum, and we will work with our staff to increase awareness on use of our Forensic Assessment Center network technology. That's kind of an ongoing thing where as staff come on and as staff roll off, sometimes usage will wane a little bit, and we need to do a little bit of re-education with our staff. We have existing training for staff when they're hired and related to the network. However, sometimes the new staff don't always remember that they're kind of hit with drinking from a fire hose when they start with us with 2 weeks of training and some field work and then another week of training. So it's understandable that sometimes they forget about some of the more nuanced or more rarely used resources that they have at their disposal. So what's really helpful is some of the work we're doing to track the outcomes, and so that will help us communicate with legislative offices when it comes time to put our request in to fund this effort after the grant ends.
Okay, thank you. Marlene, would you care to share about your plans for ongoing involvement, or communications after the grant?
Sure. The multidisciplinary team seems to be, well, in the education component, we have a full-time educator who will be who is a permanent position even after the grant is finished. We are in our third year. Part of what she will be doing is educating the public, doing public outreach, and part of that will be working with the multidisciplinary teams. And the APS director will be will continue to spearhead those multidisciplinary teams. So that's who's going to be the driving force behind keeping them up and making sure that we have people at the table. And of course, from what I'm gathering from our participants, they're going to be a really huge driving force. You know, ideally, we wouldn't want APS to be the mother of this. We are, but we don't want us to be the only one who kind of brings it along. We want our participants to have buy-in and feel like that they are part of it, and have them help us steer it. So hopefully we're looking at some participants that are going to be a good driving force for us also.
That's absolutely going to be key, because as the participants will only participate as long as they see value in it. And if they feel like they don't have a vested interest in it, it will not sustain itself. So I think you guys are headed in the right direction in that regard. Kate, what are your plans in Utah for ongoing communications once the grant period ends?
Yeah, so one of the main things we would like to do is train volunteers to educate, people in their communities about financial exploitation and scams. So some potential partners, we're not quite to that step yet due to COVID and all the slowdown it's created, but we would like to partner with our AARP volunteers, AmeriCorps Senior, and perhaps SHIP, just training to get the word out. Another thing that's a little bit hard is, as I'm sure you guys all know, new scams are coming up all the time, and we want to make sure that we're staying on top of what's current and what's relevant. So we are hoping to develop a partnership with our Attorney General's office. So in Utah, we had a case of a legislator's wife last year getting scammed out of about $150,000. And this is all public record in the news. With one of those Social Security scams where they say your Social Security number has been, associated with a crime. And anyway, she was so brave and talked to everybody about her experience. And her husband was instrumental in getting a bill passed, to reduce this and give banks more power to with like delay transactions and things like that. And one part of the bill was that the Attorney General's office is now mandated to have information on their website about scams and frauds. So I would love to get some sort of partnership with them. Our intake workers hear all the latest and greatest with scams, and I would love to have a partnership where we could help them keep their website up to date. Another thing we would really like to do is post our training materials online, so that they'll be available in the future. Not just printed materials, but presentations as well. So on that note, we have developed we're in the process of developing a couple of presentations. One of them is just traditional, somebody talking with a script, but we're also looking at things that are a little more engaging, like animations with music and fun things like that, that may be more palatable, to people in a nursing home or an assisted living facility, things like that. We're also very lucky because our one of our police agencies has created a brand new database here that uploads any training you want to have there. So we do want to get our police training up for that, so that any agency we're not able to visit in person, that people will still have access to it. that way.
Cool. Okay, well, those are the 3 topics that we asked our panelists to address. Does anyone have any questions about any of the information that you heard this afternoon? Because if not, I do. And I will go next. Michael, you talked about your relationship with the university, and I'm curious that you said it was a long-standing relationship and that you leveraged that for this grant. My question is, what was the nature of the relationship before you started the grant, and what things were you working on together with them, and was it under a contract basis then? Because it's obviously a valuable relationship for this project, and I'm wondering if other states would be able to reach out to similar entities in their states and start that if they don't have a funding stream for that right now. So I'm just kind of curious how the whole partnership was used before, and if maybe there's a way to start something without funding for other states if they wanted to do that.
Sure. So the relationship with UT Health Science Center started about 20 years ago, and it started with a local relationship between the university and our management there in our Houston district. And so they had doctors there at the medical school who would go out on capacity assessments with our staff. Of course, we would pay for the capacity assessments, but they were one-time purchases. And so the doctor would meet the caseworker at a house, and the doctor would run through the standard capacity assessment that they would do, and they'd give a determination. So we then expanded that, and we added a telemedicine aspect to it. And so now staff from any of our 254 counties can have access to the doctors at the UT Health Science Center, and can do a capacity assessment by FaceTime on their iPhones or through another technology with their tablet PCs. And the doctors will also do records reviews and will testify in court. And so there's a nurse that coordinates that, and so we now have a statewide contract with them. And so this exploitation issue has been something that they've been interested in, and of course we've been interested in it as well. And so then we had the idea of, what if instead of just using this web-based portal where caseworkers can upload information, doctors can ask questions, they can provide a written determination through that portal. What if we used it for other sorts of services, and namely the forensic accounting services? And so even though we're still working through a medical school, they are subcontracting to add that expertise, and we're leveraging existing technology that we only have to do some minor updates to in order to accommodate forensic accountants.
Wow, okay. Thank you for sharing that.
Michael, this is Andy. I have one follow-up question too. Were you able to select the forensic accounting firm that you wanted, or did you have to go through a bid process with your state? Was there anything to that?
I would have to check back on that for you.
Sure.
I don't recall exactly how we did that.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay. Any other questions for any of the panelists, Michael, Kate, or Marlene, while we still have them? I have quite a few notes actually, and I consider myself to be pretty well informed about stakeholder engagement and communications activities. But I loved, for example, Kate, your statement that you did your research and it was more than just translating the materials that you had. into another language. It was more about meeting them where they were culturally and finding out what was important to the community and making sure the materials themselves didn't just speak in their language, but actually spoke to their needs. And I thought that was pretty powerful. And I appreciated you sharing that. And I'm also, I just asked Michael a follow-up question about the thing of his that interests me the most of what was going on in Texas. And of course, Marlene, I think MDTs are extremely powerful, and I am hopeful that you all are able to get the level of engagement from your participants where they will ensure that it continues on, and APS can take a step back and let them run that process. That will be extremely, extremely powerful for your state if you're able to make that happen. So anyone, last call for questions. Andy, my next slide was questions, but I kind of skipped that one. So could you go to the last slide, please? I want to thank Marlene, Kate, and Michael very much for their participation today. Like I said, I took quite a few notes myself and thought the information was extremely helpful and enlightening. If you all have any questions or would like to get in touch with Michael, Marlene, or Kate, just reach out to the APS TARC and we can make sure to make that connection for you. I want to thank everybody for participating today and give you back 15 minutes of your afternoon. I will say have a great day and thank you for participating.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.